When my family forced me to lose weight for the wedding, I did it. But after that change, they couldn't face me anymore. Growing up, I was never the chosen one in my family. I was always the bigger kid, the one who stood out for all the wrong reasons. While my peers made friends effortlessly, I was left on the sidelines, struggling with a body that seemed to separate me from the world. Every teasing remark, every joke at my expense, chipped away at my self-esteem until all I had left was doubt. But what happens when the very family you long for approval from not only ignores your pain but adds to it? How do you cope when your own sister, the golden child, becomes the one who brings you the most hurt? This is a story about more than just weight or rejection. It's about finding your voice when no one else has ever really listened. But here's the twist. Everything changes, and it all starts with one decision. The years of bullying didn't just leave marks on my body, they burrowed deep into my soul, carving out spaces where self-doubt could take root. As a kid, I wasn't just the bigger one, I was the one everyone made fun of. They would call me names, laugh behind my back, and exclude me from things that made other kids feel like they belonged. I remember being left out of every game, every gathering, like I wasn't even worthy of being seen. I would sit alone at lunch, pretending to read a book just to escape the laughter I could feel echoing in my ears. It was suffocating. No matter how hard I tried to blend in, how many times I made myself smaller, I never quite fit. The weight of being different was something I carried in silence, knowing that the world around me saw me as the joke they never got tired of telling. But what really cut the deepest wasn't just the insults from strangers, it was the silence from the people who should have protected me. My own family, the ones who were supposed to be my refuge, didn't even notice. Or worse, they chose to look away. My parents were proud of my grades, sure, but that was the only time they ever saw me for something other than my weight. Bonnie, my younger sister, once my best friend and biggest cheerleader, slowly started pulling away, and that hurt more than I ever let on. She grew closer to the popular kids, the ones who didn't have to fight for approval, and I became invisible to her. The hurt was amplified when she began to mock me, joining in with the very people who had tormented me for years. She would take every opportunity to humiliate me in front of others, even at home, where I thought I'd be safe. At the time, I didn't understand why it was happening, why the one person I thought would always have my back became my biggest critic. But I tried to push through, pretending like I didn't care, even as my heart broke a little more with each passing day. This was the beginning of my slow unraveling, a spiral into a place I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to climb out of. The pain of those years haunted me long after the bullying stopped. I could still hear the echo of their laughter in my head, still feel the sting of Bonnie's teasing, still see the cruel, mocking expressions of classmates who treated me like an outsider. But it wasn't just the taunts from others, it was the deep sense of betrayal that gnawed at me, especially when I realized that Bonnie, my sister, was no longer the person I could lean on. I watched as she embraced her new life, leaving me behind in the shadows. She was the one who always seemed to have it easy, the one who could walk into a room and light it up. But for me, every step felt heavy, like I was dragging the weight of my insecurities with me. The moments we had shared as children, laughing and talking for hours, slowly faded away. It wasn't just the teasing anymore. It was the subtle exclusion, the way she no longer wanted to be seen with me in public, as if I were a reflection of everything she didn't want to be. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase, that she would come around, but deep down, I knew it was something deeper. It hurt, more than I could admit, to watch the sister I had always looked up to turn into someone who seemed ashamed of me. And it wasn't just Bonnie. My parents were no help. Every time I tried to voice how much it hurt, they dismissed me, told me to toughen up, that it was just sibling rivalry or harmless teasing. But it wasn't harmless when the one person you should be able to trust betrays you so completely. That silence from them, the way they excused Bonnie's behavior while I suffered, made me feel even more invisible, like nothing I did was ever good enough. The weight of it all became unbearable. I couldn't stay in that toxic space anymore, and the anger built up inside me like a storm ready to break. I knew I had to change. I had to break free from the life that felt like a cage. I had reached my breaking point. The constant feeling of being invisible, the endless rejection from my own family, it all had to end. Bonnie's wedding loomed on the horizon, and as much as I wanted to avoid the drama, I knew it was going to be the catalyst for something I could no longer ignore. My mind raced as I thought about the ways she had treated me over the years, how my parents had always excused her cruel behavior while I was left to suffer in silence. But this time, I wasn't going to sit back and let it happen again. I had already made the decision. I was going to show them the new me, the person they never saw coming. I threw myself into my transformation with a passion I didn't even know I had. It wasn't just about losing weight. It was about shedding the skin of someone who had been constantly overlooked, constantly undermined. It was about taking back control of my life, my body, my sense of self-worth. I worked tirelessly, day in and day out, pushing myself to new limits. I joined a gym, started eating clean, and hired a personal trainer who understood my struggle and, more importantly, believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was working towards something meaningful, something that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations but my own. As the days passed, the pound slowly melted away, but what was more important was the transformation happening inside me. I wasn't just becoming physically stronger, I was becoming mentally unshakable. I looked in the mirror and saw a version of myself that I had never allowed to exist. Confidence, something I had never known, was finally mine. But deep down, I knew I was doing this for a reason, because I wanted to prove something to them, to Bonnie, to my parents who had never truly seen me. The day of the family lunch arrived, and as I walked into the house, I felt a rush of emotions. The stares, the shocked silence, it was as if they couldn't believe their eyes. I had done it. I had become the person they never thought I could be. But the reactions were not what I had hoped. My parents barely acknowledged me, and Bonisha didn't even recognize me at first. When she finally did, I saw the flicker of jealousy in her eyes, followed by a forced laugh. Her response hit me like a slap in the face. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. I was ready for this moment, and for the first time in my life, I felt in control of my own story. As I stood there, the weight of their silence pressing down on me, I realized that everything had changed. The family I once thought I could rely on, the people who should have been my support system, were the very ones who were now rejecting me. Bonnie's mockery, which had once stung, now felt like a cruel joke I wasn't willing to laugh at anymore. When she finally acknowledged me, it wasn't with the admiration or warmth I had expected. Instead, it was a cold, forced laugh, the kind that only comes from someone who feels threatened. The look in her eyes said it all. She didn't know how to handle me now that I wasn't the fat, quiet sister she could ignore or make fun of. My parents, too, were not what I had hoped for. Their response to my transformation was far from what I imagined. There were no congratulations, no signs of pride. Instead, they seemed disappointed, uncomfortable even, as if my change made them question everything they had known about me. My mother tried to cover it up with casual remarks about my new look, but her eyes betrayed her confusion, maybe even jealousy. She couldn't hide the fact that she was uncomfortable seeing me stand in my own power, not needing their approval anymore. But it was Bonnie's comment that struck the hardest. As if she hadn't already hurt me enough, she couldn't resist making another jab. "I never expected you to look this pretty," she said with a smirk. "I didn't even know you had a jawline under all that fat." Her words were meant to sting, to undermine me, but they had the opposite effect. I looked her dead in the eyes, my confidence no longer something I was hiding, and I replied, "Bonnie, I've always been pretty." Losing weight just enhanced what was always there. The shock on her face was priceless, but I didn't care. The years of holding my tongue, of letting her walk all over me, had finally come to an end. I wasn't the person I had been before. I was done being the one they could push around, the one they could dismiss. I had worked too hard, fought too long for this moment, and I wasn't going to let them take it away from me. I had gained more than just a new body. I had gained my voice, my power, and it was time for them to see me for who I truly was. This was my time. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The looks, the whispers, the coldness in the air, everything felt like it was suffocating me. I had expected something different when I walked into that room, something close to recognition, even a small semblance of pride from my family. But instead, I was met with a sense of discomfort, as if I were the elephant in the room that no one wanted to acknowledge. It was clear they weren't ready for the new me. The transformation I had undergone seemed to unsettle them, and their inability to handle it only made me more certain that I had made the right choice in distancing myself from them. Bonnie, who had been the one to taunt and mock me the most, stood there, visibly uncomfortable, trying to mask her jealousy with a forced smile. Her words, thinly veiled as compliments, only stung. "You look different, but I don't know if I like it," she said, her voice wavering ever so slightly. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of insecurity, the fear that her spotlight had just dimmed. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to shrink away, to cower in the corner. This time, it was her that was uncomfortable, not me. But what hurt the most wasn't Bonnie's petty remarks, it was my parents. Their indifference was like a slap in the face. They didn't even seem to notice the change. Or worse, they didn't care. My mother's eyes scanned me with the same look of detachment as she always had, and my father, he didn't even say anything. Their silence spoke volumes, louder than any words could have. I had spent my entire life striving for their approval, trying to be good enough to fit into their narrow view of what I should be. But now, I was nothing more than a disappointment in their eyes, someone who didn't conform to their expectation. The final blow came when my mom, after a long, uncomfortable silence, casually remarked, "I don't know why you bothered with all of this. It's not like it's going to make you happy. You still haven't found a man, have you?" The words hit like a punch to the gut. Despite everything I had done to change, to rebuild myself, nothing mattered to them as much as whether or not I was meeting their vision of what my life should look like. I had spent years trying to prove myself, thinking that if I could just lose the weight, if I could just be what they wanted, I'd finally be accepted. But now, I realized that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for them. And as that realization washed over me, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I wasn't doing this for them anymore. I was doing this for me. And that was the only thing that truly mattered. No more begging for validation. No more fitting into their mold. I was free. The sting of my family's indifference lingered long after the awkward silence settled. I had hoped, perhaps naively, that showing them the person I had become, confident, powerful, unrecognizable in my strength, would trigger a shift in their hearts. Instead, it had only drawn out more cruelty and discomfort. But it was Bonnie's words, dripping with passive aggression, that truly ignited the fury I had been holding back for years. "So, when are you going to get married then? You know, it's about time you found someone, right?" Her words, masked as casual questions, were nothing more than veiled mockery. And the worst part? She was right about one thing. For all my achievements, all my growth, my parents still measured me by one metric: whether or not I fit into their picture of success. I fought to hold my composure, but the old wounds from all the years of feeling less than, of constantly being judged by standards I could never meet, suddenly opened wide. Their words echoed in my head. I was the inferior child, despite everything I had accomplished. My heart pounded in my chest as my mother joined in, her sharp voice cutting through the tension. "Bonnie's getting married. You should be happy for her, not worrying about yourself. Maybe you should lose a few pounds before the wedding to look more presentable." Her words felt like daggers, deeper than any insult I had ever received. The pain that came from those sentences wasn't just about my weight. It was about the fact that after everything, after all the work I had done on myself, this was how they saw me. I wasn't worth anything unless I looked a certain way, unless I met their rigid expectations of beauty and success. That was the moment everything inside me broke free. The anger that had simmered for so long erupted, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care if they were shocked or uncomfortable. I stood tall and said, "I am who I am, and I'm proud of it. Whether you see me as enough doesn't matter anymore. This is my life, not yours." The room fell silent. Bonnie's face turned crimson, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to shrink into their shadows any longer. This was my moment, and I was taking it. The next few days felt like a whirlwind of emotions. I could still feel the weight of that moment, standing up to my family, watching them recoil in shock as I finally spoke my truth. But despite the confrontation, there was still a part of me that felt unfulfilled. I had told them how I felt, but it didn't feel like enough. The anger inside me simmered, and I knew deep down that the only way to truly prove my worth wasn't to keep fighting for their approval, it was to continue the journey of self-love that I had started. So, I threw myself even further into my transformation. I joined a gym with a fierce determination, a fire that burned brighter with every drop of sweat. Every grueling workout, every painful rep became a statement. I will not let them define me anymore. I hired a personal trainer, someone who would push me to my limits, and for the first time, I felt like I was working towards something real, something that was for me and no one else. It wasn't just about changing my body, it was about reclaiming my power. As the days passed, I began to shed not only pounds but also the weight of the years of rejection and judgment. It was painful, emotionally and physically, but with each passing day, I felt lighter, not just in my body, but in my spirit. The confidence I had been so desperately seeking all my life started to take root. I wore clothes I had never dared to before, changed my hairstyle to something bold, something me. I began to feel like the version of myself I had always dreamed of. 2 weeks before Bonnie's wedding, I was finally ready to face them again, not as the quiet, insecure girl they once knew, but as someone who had reclaimed her own identity, her own strength. I wasn't just going to go back and prove them wrong. I was going to show them that the new me was unstoppable, and I knew that no matter what they said, it wouldn't matter anymore. This time, it was about me. As the days flew by, the transformation inside me wasn't just physical, it was a revolution. I wasn't just losing weight. I was shedding layers of shame, self-doubt, and years of emotional neglect. The gym became my sanctuary. Each drop of sweat felt like I was releasing all the pain I had carried for so long. I pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible, driven by a desire to prove something not to my family, not to Bonnie but to myself. For the first time in my life, I was doing something for me. I was finally taking control of my narrative, and with each passing day, I became more unrecognizable, not just to others, but to the girl I had once been. The physical changes were undeniable. My body began to reflect the strength I had built internally, and with it came a newfound confidence that I had never known before. My wardrobe, once filled with baggy clothes meant to hide my body, was now filled with fitted outfits that made me feel powerful. I even dared to try new hairstyles, bold, trendy, something that had always been too intimidating before. The girl who had once cowered in the shadows of her own insecurities was now stepping into the light, owning her space, owning her body. But even as I marveled at the changes, the anger inside me lingered. It wasn't just the physical transformation that fueled might, was the burning desire to stand up to my family, to show them that their judgment, their disregard for me, didn't define who I was anymore. Bonnie's wedding was fast approaching, and I knew it would be the ultimate test. Would they finally see me as I was now strong, confident, unapologetically myself, or would they continue to reduce me to the image they had created, the one I had fought so hard to escape? The morning of the family lunch came, and with it, an overwhelming sense of anticipation. I took a deep breath and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't just see the changes on the outside. I saw the strength, the courage, the victory on the inside. This was my moment to show them the woman I had become, and nothing, not even their rejection, could take that away. The moment I stepped into my family's home, I could feel the air shift. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Bonnie was the first to react, or rather, fail to react. She didn't even recognize me at first. The discomfort in her eyes was impossible to miss. I could see it in the way she hesitated, her lips curving into a tight, forced smile, as if she couldn't quite reconcile the person standing in front of her with the one she had spent years mocking. The disbelief in her gaze was almost satisfying, but I didn't let myself feel smug. Not yet. As I walked further into the room, I felt the stares of my parents, the silence that followed, as if they were trying to figure out who I was. For years, I had been nothing more than the invisible one, the one they could overlook. But now, I was the center of their attention, and I could feel them struggling to adjust to this new version of me, this version that didn't need their approval to feel whole. My mother's eyes darted from me to Bonnie, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face, before she quickly masked it with a neutral expression. She didn't know what to say, what to feel. The words of praise I had longed for all my life didn't come, but I could see the recognition in her eyes. I was no longer the girl they could dismiss. But it was Bonnie's reaction that cut the deepest. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice laced with forced nonchalance. "Wow, you look different." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't hold the power they once had. I could feel the change, the shift in our dynamic. The power that had once been hers, now slipping away. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to shrink. I stood tall, my chin lifted, knowing that the woman standing before them was finally the one I had always been meant to be. The weight of their disappointment hung heavy in the air, but I didn't back down. Bonnie's forced remarks and my parents' cold indifference couldn't shake me now. For the first time, I realized that their approval was never going to come in the way I had dreamed of for years. But the hardest blow wasn't just their silence. It was the feeling that after everything, after the transformation, the pain, the growth, they still couldn't see me for who I truly was. Bonnie's sneering comment about my appearance was an obvious attempt to put me back in my place. "I never expected you to look this pretty," she said, as though I were some ugly duckling who had somehow miraculously turned into a swan. Her words were dripping with jealousy, and for a brief moment, I almost felt the sting of the old insecurities creeping back in. But then, something inside me snapped. I wasn't that girl anymore, the one who would shrink under Bonnie's cruel jokes, the one who would retreat into silence. This time, I fought back, my voice steady and filled with newfound power. "Bonnie," I said, my gaze unwavering, "I've always been pretty." Losing weight just gave me the courage to finally see it. The shock in her eyes was almost too satisfying to ignore, but I held my ground. This was my moment to reclaim not only my body but my voice. The room was thick with tension as my parents stood by, still unmoved, still clinging to their old notions of what I should be. But I no longer cared. I wasn't the quiet, insecure girl who lived for their approval. I was a woman who had worked hard to get here, who had learned to embrace herself in all her forms. As I turned to leave, their voices echoed behind me, but they no longer held power over me. I walked out that door, not as the girl they had tried to keep small, but as the woman who had finally learned to stand tall. And that, in the end, was enough. I didn't want to attend Bonnie's wedding anymore. The thought of walking into that room, knowing I would be nothing more than a token guest for them to show off, made my stomach turn. For years, I had been fighting for their approval, changing, bending myself into the shape they wanted, but nothing was ever enough. And now, after everything I had done to transform not just my body but my very self, there was no validation, no acknowledgement of my strength. It was clear that nothing would ever satisfy them. But the pressure from my parents to attend, to keep the family together, was suffocating. They didn't care about my growth. They just wanted me to be the obedient daughter who smiled and pretended everything was fine. They couldn't even see the woman standing before them, the one who had worked tirelessly for years to free herself from their expectations. The guilt gnawed at me. I knew they would be furious if I didn't show up. But at that moment, I realized that I had been living my life for them, not for me. I made my decision. I wouldn't go. Instead, I booked a trip just for me, a vacation to reclaim my peace, my joy, and my sense of self. I would no longer be part of their toxic cycle. I was finally putting myself first. And for once, that felt like enough.